The biting January wind whipped around the playground of Oakhaven Academy, a chill that Brianna O'Connell hardly noticed as she rushed across the icy asphalt toward the entrance. Her oversized olive-green parka, a hand-me-down that was showing its age, billowed around her petite figure. Standing just shy of 5'2", with curly auburn hair that often hid half her face, she had become adept at fading into the background of crowded places. Brianna kept her head down, tightly gripping the straps of her well-used book bag as she maneuvered through groups of students. She'd been at Oakhaven for nearly 4 months, ever since her mum took a job in the city, and each day felt like navigating a dangerous maze. Starting over was hard enough, but joining a new school where everyone already had their cliques, and she was just the strange, quiet girl who ate lunch alone, was even harder. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," a voice sneered from behind her. Brianna's heart sank. She knew that voice all too well. Trenton Blackwood, the undisputed ruler of the 11th grade. Built like a linebacker with an arrogant smirk that suggested he never faced consequences, Trenton had made it his personal project to make her life a living nightmare since the day she arrived at Oakhaven. She sped up her walk, but heavy footsteps quickly closed the gap. Trenton casually fell into step beside her, accompanied by his usual cronies. There was Kyle Peterson, a pudgy, freckled-faced kid with a mean glint in his eyes who clearly craved Trenton's approval, and Brittany Swanson, a slender brunette whose cruelty was often disguised by a fake smile. "Just ignore them," Brianna muttered to herself, the same mantra she'd been repeating for months. She'd learned early on that arguing only made things worse. Back at her old school in Portland, she'd been just another student. But here at Oakhaven, her quiet nature and obvious new kid status had turned her into a target. The smells of exhaust fumes and cheap cologne hung heavy in the air. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Earth to Weirdo," Trenton said, grabbing her arm and spinning her around roughly. "What's with the jacket? You look like a green blob." Kyle snickered loudly. "Maybe she's wearing it to hide." "It's working. I almost didn't see her." Brianna's face flushed, but she bit back a retort. She had endured worse than this. Growing up, her grandmother had always told her that sometimes the best response was no response at all. "Kindness is always the best defense," she had said countless times during their talks. "A strong person knows when to be silent and when to speak up." But Trenton wasn't finished. He moved closer, his friends forming a tight circle around her. "You know what? I bet you're roasting in that ridiculous jacket. Maybe we should help you cool off." Before Brianna could react, Trenton grabbed the buttons of her jacket and started to undo them. The frigid air hit her instantly, and she instinctively stepped back, trying to close the jacket again. But Kyle was already reaching for her sleeves, and Brittany was giggling that high-pitched sound that made Brianna's skin crawl. The scent of their expensive perfume mixed with the smell of stale pizza from the cafeteria. "Stop it, please," Brianna said quietly, but her voice was drowned out by their laughter. "What was that?" Trenton mocked, tugging at her jacket again. "I can't hear you over the sound of my own awesomeness." Other students had begun to notice the commotion. Some slowed down to watch, while others pretended not to see anything. Brianna spotted Mr. Harrison, her history teacher, across the playground, but the man was deep in conversation with the principal and seemed unaware of the situation. This had become the routine over the last few months. Trenton and his crew would corner her in the hallways, the library, or even in the cafeteria, and they would make some nasty remark about her clothes, her hair, or her lack of friends. They would knock her books out of her hands, accidentally spill their drinks on her, or make loud comments about her when she walked by. Brianna had tried everything she could think of to make it stop. She had told the vice principal, who had given her a concerned look and promised to handle it, but nothing had changed. She had tried taking different routes between classes, eating lunch in the art room instead of the cafeteria, and even arriving at school later to avoid the morning rush. But Trenton always seemed to find her. "Hey, leave her alone, will you?" a voice said from behind them. Brianna turned to see Ethan Carter approaching, his sketchbook clutched under his arm. Ethan was in her advanced art class, and he had been one of the few students who had tried to make her feel welcome. He was skinny and awkward, with kind eyes behind round glasses, and Brianna had noticed him sketching her sometimes during class, when she wasn't looking. "Oh, look who's playing White Knight," Brittany said with a sneer. "What's the matter, Ethan? You got a crush on the green blob?" Ethan's face turned red, but he stood his ground. "I said leave her alone." Trenton laughed and stepped toward Ethan. "Or what? You gonna draw us to death?" "Actually," Ethan said, raising his sketchbook, "that's not a bad idea. I'm sure the school paper would love some candid sketches of you harassing other students." For a moment, Trenton's confident facade cracked. Being caught by the school newspaper would definitely make things difficult for him, especially if the sketches reached the principal. But then his smirk returned, and he grabbed the sketchbook and snatched it out of Ethan's hands. The crisp morning air carried the scent of coffee from the nearby cafe. "Oops," Trenton said, letting the expensive sketchbook fall to the ground. "Clumsy me." Ethan lunged forward to grab his sketchbook, but Kyle stuck out his foot and tripped him. The sketchbook slid across the asphalt, and Brianna heard something tear as it hit the edge of a bench. "No!" Ethan scrambled to his feet and rushed to his sketchbook. The cover was ripped, and when he opened it, several of his drawings were ruined. "This was my grandma's sketchbook. It's one of a kind." "Maybe you should be more careful with your stuff," Trenton said with a shrug. "Now, where were we?" He turned back to Brianna, but she was already backing away, her hands clutched around her jacket. She couldn't watch this anymore. Ethan had tried to help her, and now his sketchbook was ruined because of her. The guilt was crushing. "Actually, you know what?" Trenton said, his voice turning dangerous. "I think you need to learn some respect. At Oakhaven, we don't ignore people when they're talking to us." He grabbed her jacket by the shoulders and pulled hard. Brianna lost her balance and stumbled backward, but Trenton's grip was firm. With a sharp yank, he pulled the jacket completely off her shoulders, leaving her standing in the freezing playground in just her thin sweater. "There," he said, holding her jacket above his head like a prize. "Now you can enjoy the lovely city weather." The cold hit Brianna like a physical blow. Her sweater was thin cotton, intended to be worn under the jacket, and the January wind cut through it like it wasn't there. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering uncontrollably. "Give it back," she said, her voice barely audible. "What was that?" Trenton cupped his ear theatrically. "I can't hear you over the sound of your teeth chattering." Kyle and Brittany were laughing hysterically now, and more students had stopped to watch. Brianna could see the mixture of unease and morbid interest on their faces. They knew what was happening was wrong, but nobody wanted to be the next target. "Please," Brianna said, louder this time, "give me my jacket back." "Oh, she can talk," Trenton said, "but I don't think you're asking nicely enough. Maybe if you got on your knees and begged." Something inside Brianna snapped, not the loud kind of anger that led to impulsive actions, but the quiet, focused rage that her mom had taught her to recognize and control. She had been holding back for months, telling herself that fighting would only make things worse, that her grandmother would be disappointed, that she needed to be better than her tormentors. But as she stood there shivering in the playground, watching Trenton wave her jacket around like a trophy while other students laughed and filmed with their phones, she realized that her restraint had been mistaken for weakness. Her grandmother had taught her that kindness was strength, but she had also taught her that sometimes you had to defend yourself. Brianna stopped shivering. She straightened her posture and looked directly at Trenton for the first time in months. "Give me my jacket." There was something different in her voice, something that made Trenton's smile falter slightly. But he had an audience now, and backing down would mean losing face. "I don't think so," he said. "Maybe I'll keep it. Consider it a donation to the Trenton Blackwood fan club." He turned to toss the jacket to Kyle, and that's when Brianna moved. For 11 years, since she was 6 years old, Brianna had trained in self-defense under her mother's instruction. Her mom had been a member of the police force before retiring to raise her, and she had passed her skills on to her daughter with patience and dedication. Brianna had earned her first belt years ago, and she'd been training for her next level when they moved to the city. The air crackled with anticipation. Her mother had made her promise never to use her skills unless absolutely necessary, and she had kept that promise even when it meant enduring months of humiliation. But watching Trenton destroy Ethan's sketchbook and then steal her jacket in front of half the school, she realized that this was absolutely necessary. Trenton was still turned away when Brianna's leg shot up in a swift front kick. Her foot connected with his hand with a loud thud, and her jacket went flying. He spun around, clutching his hand and staring at her in disbelief. What the hell? Brianna's other leg came up this time, a precise snap kick that caught him in the stomach. All the air rushed out of Trenton's lungs, and he doubled over, gasping for air. The playground had gone completely silent, except for the sound of his wheezing. Kyle started forward, but Brianna was already moving. She spun on her foot and brought her leg up in a high, spinning kick that stopped just inches from Kyle's face. He froze, eyes wide with fear, as he realized how close he had come to having his nose broken. "Don't," Brianna said calmly. Kyle stumbled backward, hands raised in surrender. Brittany was already backing away, her face pale with shock. Trenton straightened up slowly, still gasping for air. His face was red with humiliation and rage, and Brianna could see him calculating his next move. He outweighed her by at least 70 pounds, and his pride was wounded. She knew he would try to charge her. "You think you're tough?" he wheezed. "You think a few lucky kicks makes you some kind of ninja?" "I think you should walk away," Brianna said calmly. She had shifted into the fighting stance her mother had taught her thousands of times, balanced with her hands ready. "Like hell," Trenton snarled, and he charged. Brianna dodged his clumsy rush and grabbed his outstretched arm. Using his own momentum against him, she turned and threw him over her shoulder in a textbook throw. Trenton hit the ground hard, but Brianna was already moving. She dropped down and pinned his arm behind his back, applying just enough pressure to make him feel the strain in his shoulder. One more inch of pressure, and she could dislocate his shoulder or break his arm. The scent of fear was palpable. "Do you give up?" she asked quietly. Trenton struggled for a moment, but the position was hopeless. He was face down on the ground with his arm trapped, and any movement he made only increased the pressure on his joint. "I give up," he gasped. "I give up." Brianna held the position for another moment, then released him and stood up. Trenton rolled over, clutching his arm and staring up at her with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You're insane," he said. "You're completely nuts." "Maybe," Brianna said, picking up her jacket and putting it on. "But I'm not cold." She walked over to where Ethan was sitting on the ground, still cradling his ruined sketchbook. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded, though his face was pale. "I can't believe you just did that." "I'm so sorry about your sketchbook," Brianna said. "I'll help you replace it." "Don't worry about it," Ethan said, getting to his feet. It was worth it to see the look on his face. Around them, students were still staring in shock. Some were taking pictures with their phones, and Brianna knew that by the end of the day, everyone in school would know what had happened. She felt a moment of panic. What if she got expelled? What if her grandmother found out? What if this made things worse? But then she looked at Trenton, still sitting on the ground, with his friends hovering nervously around him, and she realized that she didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. The city skyline loomed in the distance. "Brianna!" a voice called out. She turned to see Mr. Harrison approaching, his face concerned. "What happened here?" "Nothing," Brianna said quickly. "Just a disagreement." Mr. Harrison looked between Brianna and Trenton, clearly sensing that more had happened than anyone was admitting. But before he could ask more questions, the bell rang, and students began hurrying toward the building. "Are you sure you're all right?" Mr. Harrison asked Brianna quietly. "I'm fine," Brianna said. "Better than fine, actually." As the crowd dispersed, Trenton slowly got to his feet. His friends gathered around him, asking if he was okay, but he waved them off. He looked at Brianna for a long moment, and she met his gaze without flinching. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Brianna replied. "Unless you want another demonstration." Trenton opened his mouth to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. He turned and walked away, his friends trailing behind him like sheep. Ethan fell into step beside Brianna as they headed toward the building. "So," he said, "remind me never to get on your bad side." Despite everything, Brianna smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." Over the next few days, Brianna noticed subtle changes in how other students treated her. Some gave her a wide berth, clearly nervous about what she might do if provoked. Others nodded respectfully when she passed them in the hallways. A few even approached her to ask about self-defense, curious about her training. Trenton, meanwhile, seemed to have developed a sudden interest in avoiding her altogether. He no longer sought her out between classes, and when their paths crossed in the hallway, he would look away and find somewhere else to be. Kyle and Brittany had similarly vanished, though Brianna occasionally caught them whispering and pointing when they thought she wasn't looking. The most significant change, however, was in Ethan. What had started as a simple act of kindness in defending her had grown into something more. They began eating lunch together in the art room, talking about art and their shared experience of being outsiders. Ethan was kind and funny, with a quirky sense of humor that caught Brianna off guard and made her laugh despite herself. "You know," he said one afternoon as they sat in the art room, "I always wondered why you never fought back before. I mean, it was obvious you could handle yourself." Brianna looked up from her art project. "My mom taught me that fighting should always be the last resort. She said that true strength comes from knowing when not to use your power." "And what changed your mind?" Brianna was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I realized that sometimes not fighting is just another form of weakness. I was so afraid of becoming like them that I forgot about standing up for myself." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you found the right balance. You stopped them without becoming them." It was true. In the weeks that followed, Brianna found that she had no desire to seek out Trenton or his friends for revenge. The confrontation in the playground had been enough. She had proven her point and reclaimed her dignity, and that was all she had wanted. About a month after the incident, Brianna was walking home from school when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Trenton approaching, alone this time. She tensed instinctively, but something in his posture told her this wasn't a threat. "I just wanted to say," he began, then stopped and looked down at his feet. "I wanted to apologize." Brianna raised an eyebrow. "Apologize? For what I did? To you and to Ethan? It was wrong." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. "I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realized that I was just being a jerk. Plain and simple." "What brought this on?" Brianna asked. Trenton shrugged. "My cousin started high school this year. She's shy, like you were, and I kept thinking about how I would feel if someone treated her the way I treated you." He paused. "I guess I never really thought about how it felt from the other side." Brianna studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But he seemed genuinely sorry, and she found herself believing him. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "But if you ever do anything like that again—" "I won't," Trenton said quickly. "I promise." As he walked away, Brianna felt a sense of peace that she hadn't expected. She had stood up for herself, earned respect from her peers, and even managed to change the mind of her tormentor. It was more than she had hoped for when she first arrived at Oakhaven. Later that evening, she was practicing her self-defense moves in her room when her mother came in to watch. She observed her movements silently for several minutes before speaking. The sounds of the city drifted through the open window. "You seem different," she said finally, "more confident." Brianna completed her form and turned to face her. "I had to use what you taught me at school." Her mum's expression became serious. "Tell me what happened." Brianna recounted the story of the confrontation in the playground, expecting her mother to be disappointed in her for resorting to violence. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "You showed control," she said. "You could have seriously hurt him, but you chose not to. That shows maturity." "I was afraid you'd be upset," Brianna admitted. "A strong person who never defends herself is not truly strong," her mother said. "But a strong person who uses her strength unnecessarily is not strong either. You found the balance between the two, and that is the mark of a truly strong person." As spring arrived and the school year drew to a close, Brianna found herself settling into a comfortable routine at Oakhaven. She had made friends beyond Ethan, joined the art club, and even started helping other students with their projects. The quiet, invisible girl who had arrived in January was gone, replaced by someone who was still quiet, but no longer invisible. The incident in the playground had become something of a legend at Oakhaven, growing with each telling until some versions had Brianna single-handedly taking on half the football team. But the truth was simpler and more meaningful. She had stood up for herself and for someone she cared about, and in doing so, she had discovered her own strength. On the last day of school, as she was cleaning out her locker, Ethan approached with a small gift. "What's this?" she asked. "A thank you gift," he said, "for helping me replace my sketchbook, and for being you." Brianna opened the gift to find a small, framed drawing. It was a sketch of her that Ethan had made during one of their art sessions, captured in a moment when she was laughing at something he had said. But what struck her most was the expression on her face, confident, happy, and completely at ease with herself. "I love it," she said, and meant it. "I thought you might want to remember this year," Ethan said. "How much you've grown." Brianna looked at the drawing again, then at Ethan, then out at the playground where her transformation had begun. "I think I'll remember it just fine." As she walked out of Oakhaven Academy for the last time that year, Brianna reflected on the lessons she had learned. She had discovered that standing up for yourself didn't mean becoming a bully, that strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from choosing your battles wisely, and that sometimes the quiet ones were the ones you had to watch out for. The sweet scent of freshly cut grass filled the air. Most importantly, she had learned that respect was something you earned, not something you were given, and that the best way to earn it was to first respect yourself. The girl who had once made herself invisible had found her voice, and she would never be silent again. 21,433